there are various like hangups in my system of like, oh, like I've been seen and socialized so much as masculine, so I need to like fight and stop that from happening in order to
Right.
affirm that non-binariness. And
Welcome to the Fuck Suffering Podcast. I am your hostess, Ray Hance, and we get into a very juicy conversation with today's guests about non-binary identity and how that relates to all of us essentially having a non-binary spirit but being born into a specific body, and how do we navigate the nuance of that territory? When are we ceasing to be with what is and bringing ourselves suffering? And when is it time to double down on those identity politics? What is sincere? What do we do, and when do we step back? When do we surrender, and when do we collapse? And what is our guest's question for the I Ching this week? How will I be okay?
So, what question is most alive for you right now?
I had some prepared, maybe this won't be the one that like we actually work with, but at the moment it's like, will I be okay?
I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
And since the answer to that is always yes, I think maybe if we put a how in front of it, that could be helpful in terms of how it's emerging.
I love that. Something's happening. I just want to like check out what just happened in me.
Yeah.
It's something about just like whatever shift just happened is kind of saying to me like, it's okay that it's that simple. Like it's okay to like just want to be okay. Like I've been coming from my mind at these questions of like, how can I relate to Los Angeles, and how can I blah blah blah, and how can I go through this move? And like maybe those are good questions, but what it really is like, will I be okay?
Yeah. And the tenderness of that, you know, the yearning under it, like just being with the yearning under it without letting mind complicate things so much.
Yes. And it's also just like the simpleness of just like, yeah, like I just want to be okay. Like something I've been working with Essie on is just like not doing this. Like there's a
Move away, baby. Move away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And often I'll just be, I just try to do things, and the things are often like they seem really great. So I kind of am like, oh, okay, yeah, like let's do this.
To what part of you?
Sorry, what'd you say?
They seem really great to what part of you?
No. Oh no. There's this part of me that's like, yeah, like I want to kill it. Like,
of course you do. That's great. You should slay.
I should, but that voice kind of like the imagery I'm getting is just like elbowing and fighting people in my path, and there's kind of a like, I'm on my own, like I don't need help, like and there's use in that to, you know, that part for sure. But
is there? We're getting off to a good start here.
Oh no.
She always sends me the best people. She really does. My favorite episodes are her and the people that she sent me.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's so funny, because what just happened for me, I was like, well, yeah, like this is surely connected to like an ancestral part, and like that ancestor surely like went through it, they needed to do that, like that elbowing. And when you ask me that, I was kind of like, oh, like it doesn't really feel like it's connected to any ancestor at the moment. It's kind of just me.
Well, even if it
You know,
is that for you to perpetuate or is that for you to integrate?
right. Yeah, at the moment I'm kind of just looking out in front of me, and I'm just like I'm still doing this elbowing thing.
Yeah, you're all elbows.
It's very elbowy. I don't usually do much elbow stuff, and I'm kind of just like, what are you even doing with that? Like, seeing that there's nothing that it's actually doing it at, and I'm seeing that there's actually something like further in front of me that doesn't necessarily need elbowing. It's just like a reality that like I don't really want to confront. It's like not even that like dangerous or against me. It's just like, it's making me feel vulnerable.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's like, then what are you elbowing away that's actually for you?
Oh, this is good.
Yeah. Like the goat butting his head against the hedge is exhausting for himself and others. And like knowing when you're, I think it's easy to notice when you're given a surge of energy to use for the next correct action, and when you're not capping that and calling it anxiety versus trying to summon a lot of energy that isn't yours for this moment.
Could you say that one more time? Sorry.
There's a difference between using energy, like a surge of energy that's given to you in the moment, and not capping it and calling it anxiety because you don't want to do the next right action, versus trying to summon energy that is not yours for this moment. That if you're actually in a wu wei moment where you're actually being asked to be still and notice the elbows, as opposed to a time for decisive and swift action. There are times for each, like,
Yeah.
and noticing what time it is helpful, because you don't squander that precious life force. You are actually able to use it when it's yours to use, and trusting that you'll be given what you need in the moment that it's time to use it.
This is resonating because what's happening is I feel like, and we'll see where this imagery takes us, but so I was elbowing in front of me, and I was looking right in front of me, and I was like, oh, there's not actually anything right in front of me to elbow. And then I saw in like the distance, maybe like 40 yards away, there's like this hillside in Los Angeles. Maybe I've been there, maybe I haven't. Maybe just like, it's just representative of something, and it's trying to talk to me, and I can feel it saying something just pretty, it's like not very judgmental. It's just like, this is what you need to know. Like, and I can sense that it's not very, physically threatening, but I can tell that for me to engage with it will make me feel vulnerable in a way that I'm like, no. So
What's pushing you from behind? You're looking in front of you and elbowing the sides, but what's behind you? What can you feel but not see?
In that imagery or in my life currently?
Just like in that image.
There's kind of nothing behind me, but when you asked that, a bunch of things just came up for me that I could like conjure up, like, oh, these like horrible plagues behind me, just like, drought and like, I don't know, famine. And
so are you being propelled by fear?
In this imagery, no, I don't think so. I think in my usual, in the rest of my life, probably yes. I don't know. In this imagery, it's more just like let me think.
Well, famine and plague are. That's why I asked.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Wait, I'm sensing something. Yes. Okay. So when I'm just looking at the hill, it's like, oh, this is beautiful. But then when I look to my left or like behind me, I see like famine, drought, whatever behind me. And I'm like, oh gosh, like, Hill, I can't talk to you because there's all of this happening. Like, there's like your message is actually like more beautiful than I feel like is the reality behind me.
Well, that's behind you. Yeah. So that's great that that's propelling you toward your actual vision. But it's also good to notice and feel what's moving you so that you can move from a more grounded place, that you could be propelled by life rather than fear.
Mm,
You can be propelled by what's life affirming rather than what's life denying. And that's always going to be in the body.
gotcha. Mm,
And that really does, the question of how will I be okay seems very well suited to that scenario, to that vision.
right. Already what's kind of happening is like from my mind that came like, well, I don't deserve to feel like this, message from the hill when like, all this stuff is behind me. But
Because
then
the
when I
world.
right. But then I was like, okay, like let's just, release that grip a little. And then in my body came a more nuanced, like, okay, like how can we be with the hill and behind me?
Yeah, because that's where you're at.
Mm.
There.
Ah. Mm.
And liminal spaces are always really vulnerable.
Yes.
And we always return to liminal spaces. We always find our way back to the threshold. That's actually the last hexagram in the I Ching is 64, threshold. So we can always count on the threshold to return.
Gotcha.
So how we embody it makes all the difference. Like we know when it's time to stop for street tacos and a white sand beach, and we know when it's time to use the energy at our disposal for the next right decisive action, and when we don't need to force anything or summon energy that isn't ours for this moment.
Mm.
And we can move with the time and the tide, and things just become a lot easier, a lot less fraught.
Ay, ay, ay. It's difficult. At the moment, I'm in the liminal space. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, this is just where you need to be.
Yeah.
And that feels cool. But I do feel a part of me that's like ready to like launch me back into this place of controlling and doing and whatever because when I was last in LA 2 years ago, I injured myself, and that's been a whole thing. And there's a part of me that's like, this liminal space is like cool, but um, like something's gonna happen in this environment, and it's gonna threaten me, and I can't be in this liminal space. Like, I gotta get in control mode because this is like vulnerable. So.
Do you trust that the liminal space can lead you, that if you allow it to lead you out, then there's more safety in that than if you force your way out before the time has come for you to leave it?
Mm.
not trying to solve the liminal space with your mind, but just embody it, and so that you can really trace the nuances of the exit and follow instead of leading.
There's a good significant amount of me that does not trust that, but as I kind of just relax in that liminal space, I can feel it guiding me to where and how and like what I need to be quote unquote doing. And a voice came up for me that was like, yeah, like that liminal space is like more reliable because it's like what is actually happening. It's like where you actually are.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ay, ay, ay.
Do you often struggle to discern the space between surrender and collapse?
Totally. I've been in very extreme experiences of both of those for the last like 2.5 years.
Okay. So you are familiar with how like surrender is actually an active state. Like Wu Wei is not exactly passive.
Right.
It's a state of spacious readiness.
Right. Because there is a part of me that's like, okay, we're going to do nothing. But in a way that's like, you know,
which
really
becomes another thing to do, right?
Exactly. But when I am, you know, doing the Wu Wei, like, oh, okay. Like, I can't even describe it. It's just like, oh, okay.
When the action is called for, you meet the action. When the rest is called for, you meet the rest. And trusting the fertility of rest.
Right. I have not, I find myself in like the river of the Wu Wei, and it's like, oh, okay, like cool. But I think there's still a practice for me in like, you know, giving my system some experience of like trusting that. So, you know, I think that'll happen over time of like, oh yeah, like we can rest in this. Cause I often like find the moments of Wu Wei, but then I like very quickly get out of it. So I think the more, you know, there's a certain thing of like trusting it and letting my system trust it. So it's a practice.
Totally. And I think that's especially challenging for masculine embodiments. Because there is like a doing, there is a doing factor. There is the penetration factor, you know, and of like trusting that yin can bring up a lot of primal wounding too. Like that fear of engulfment can kick in. Like, oh, if I can't just let this river carry me because I could drown. And that, like, you know, there's a lot of primal wounding can come up around that.
Yeah. Totally. I'm just thinking about how like I do identify as like non-binary, whatever that means, but even in like some of my experience of femininity, it's still in a very like masculine yang kind of doing way. So there's a whole like, you know, yin feminine exploration that will be fruitful for me to keep doing.
Right. And I think that's where like non-binary identity is so fruitful as a spiritual path. You know what I mean? Like, because I mean, I'm definitely in a feminine embodiment, but my spiritual practice is certainly non-binary. You know, it's like that inner hieros gamos has everything to do with energetic mastery.
Yeah, there's a lot of masculine something energy that, yeah.
And trusting that too. So if I trust my body to lead, then I have to allow my identity to be to go with that, to like move with that to a certain extent. Like, okay, I understand that my body is filtering. My sense gates are housed in a feminine body. So the information that I'm coming that's coming in is going through like a non-binary metabolism, but I have to notice the gates through which it's entering. Do you see what I'm saying?
I love that. Thank you for that. Because for me, it's like maybe I'm in a non-binary body, whatever that means. And, like the gating and the sensing, whatever, like the metabolism, like maybe it's all non-binary, but there are various like hangups in my system of like, oh, like I've been seen and socialized so much as masculine, so I need to like fight and stop that from happening in order to
Right.
affirm that non-binariness. And I've
Yes.
definitely known this, but that it's okay to embrace both, but there's this fear of like, no, 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 like we have to stop that masculineness. So what just
Right.
happened to me with your suggestion is like, oh, like it's okay to allow that. Like that is part of you and that is cool or whatever. Like it's okay to go with that.
Because then that's another spot of forcing.
Right. Right. And I think there's just this little fear of like, there's this little fear voice that's like, no, if we let this masculine go too much, then we won't be non-binary or whatever. And like, listen to that voice too, just like go with all of these instead of like fighting and be like, no, I have to like corner these little parts of my identity to be what I am. It's more just like, okay, yeah, we followed that. Oh, there's this voice that doesn't like that. Follow that.
Because then that's more clinging and aversion around identity. And then that just brings more suffering instead of the freedom that identity could be allowing.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean?
Totally. And that is what I know on a deep level. Like that is the path that that is just a path. It's just like it's a path of freedom. But there's like a lot of like non-binary representation in the media that gets me really hooked into being like, well, I need to have this identity.
How much of that is external validation?
Right. And like that's valid too and is necessary on some level, but it's not what I really want on like a deep level.
Well, it's necessary for blazing a path of freedom for others to embrace that freedom in themselves too. It's important to create a cultural climate in which everybody can be free.
For sure.
But it also has to be sincere to you and your experience of the world.
Gotcha. Of course. There's just this, what just happened, I struck a note of like, oh, just like, and Essie says this to me, just like honor the multiplicity.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think there's a part of my system that's like, well, like I'm a little like complex.
Yeah, great.
There's some specialness in that.
Yeah.
Well, parts of my system, like, do have like I'm special, but I think that's not maybe necessarily the issue so much right now. It's like, yeah, like you are a little different in certain ways. And like, that's a little vulnerable. And that hasn't really been like, held.
But noticing where specialness brings separation. That separation will bring suffering. And so what you represent versus how you are, when they start to get too far apart, I think that's worth noticing.
How far, what becomes apart?
What you represent and how you are.
Oh, yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, that's something I'm always noticing in myself, like what does it mean to be in this feminine body and have an utterly non-binary spirit fundamentally,
right?
But also enjoy the gifts of that feminine embodied filter.
Right.
That there are gifts in it, that it does not behoove me to fight because that's where I've been placed by fate. And so I have to honor what is. And the more I honor what is, the better I'm able to serve.
Right. Because what this is making me think about is like going back to something we kind of just touched on, which is like the whole like non-binary representation thing of like there I see a lot of folks, and I've kind of been part of this, not on like a huge level, but just like, okay, like I have something and I need to just like put something forward to just like have it be acknowledged as like a thing on the table in my life and other people's lives. And like a few minutes ago, I would have said, like, well, that sucks. Like, that's not genuine. But right now, I'm like, well, like, it's imperfect. And like, sometimes you, like, maybe you do just like cast something like, okay, I just need to throw something out there.
Of
But
course.
there's a process, maybe, like, where you can refine, like, okay, like, what am I actually, like, or like, what's actually genuine for me and what's helpful, like,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, what is the thing that is sincere is usually what is helpful.
Mm. Mm. Right. It's just tricky when it's like, yeah, like sometimes throwing something out there, or like, just embodying like this is what I am and this is what I'm feeling. Like it serves some need, but like, how to refine and decipher, like, okay, like what is the thing that my system really needs? Or,
Yeah.
how can I get to that place of,
And,
okay.
and trusting that because you're embedded and embodied in a broader ecosystem, that what you really need is what the system needs. And that you are fundamentally a vessel for that broader system. Not just the political system, but the ecology.
Yes, and this is like very fruitful for me because this is like a huge hang up that I have been having for this, like, I don't know, many years, which is like I don't trust that what is helpful for me is helpful to the, all beings, or, whatever, because I'm like, oh, I'm a human living during like human caused climate change, and like I am only taking up water and resources, and I'm just like, there's my sheer existence is horrible. So
To have that net positive existence will weigh on you, but when does it weigh to the point of victim consciousness?
like all the time.
And then that slides you into rescuer, which then will slide you occasionally into perpetrator. Next thing you know, you're on the victim triangle and nobody's free.
And then I'm just in collapse, like, because it's just like way too much for my system.
Yeah. Yeah, when that surrender to that selfishness without self-centeredness actually is productive of good.
Ay, ay, ay.
It doesn't have to be self-centered to be selfish.
Well, that is juicy.
Yeah, there's a lot of good nuance, and there's a lot of good, juicy polarity in that field between self-centeredness and selfishness. There's a lot of trust in selfishness.
Wow. There is a selfishness that benefits other beings.
Yes. Taking those vows themselves, like when I took the vows, like that was a completely selfish act. And like, but the level to which I cling to that identity can turn out to be counterproductive. If I'm still like being like, I honor these vows, because those vows are meant to be a living system to which I've committed myself to live within that beautiful ecology of those bodhisattva vows. And so like my life is always emerging from that. And I only have myself, my body, my mind, my pussy from which to have the energy to emerge. Like I emerge from the ecology of erotic emergence is everything. And I trust that. I trust that that will extrude me to the place I need to be. And there is pleasure in that. And there is selfishness in that. And I honor those. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. The way I've been thinking about it is like in my study of like herbalism and whatever that is, like, like
Making allies, building alliances is how I see herbalism.
Totally. It can also be other things, but yes.
And also for walking the poison path and building your metabolism.
Totally. Yeah, I just meant like it can be taken in weird ways, whatever. Another conversation. But, when I look at plants, I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're not doing everything for the like ecosystem. Like you are kind of just doing what you can do, and like you aren't solving like 10 of these problems, or like, much more than 10, like and quote unquote problems, but like you plant are not like doing everything, but like you are doing one thing, or more than just one thing, but like you're doing what you can do, and it's not everything, but it's something, and it is needed for the ecosystem. And like if everyone does like their thing that they can do, like that's how ecosystems become really whatever.
And that's how all beings become free. Ta-da!
Right.
A peony's got 99 problems and an iris problem ain't one.
Say that again?
A peony's got 99 problems and an iris problem ain't one. You know what I mean? Like, so don't take on what's not yours.
Right. There's just this like part of me that's like, oh, things are not good. I'm going to take on everything. And when I'm actually doing that, I'm not actually helping anyone.
No, you're not.
I feel very in control. I'm like, oh, okay, like this needs to do that, and that needs to do this. And if I can just like humble myself and be a plant to be like, yeah, I'm really not going to solve 99 problems, but I can do one thing, and in that one thing, I can actually give so much more than just like, it's just hard to arrive at that point, but
it's not. It's actually the easiest thing in the world to do.
That is true. It's very easy.
The hard thing is to try to do everything but that. That's the goat butting its head against the hedge. Creating entanglement where there's really just ease. And ease is always far more impressive.
It is. Oh, yoy.
So how will you be okay? Is that still your question? It's a good question.
It is good.
What's alive for you in this moment, though?
What's alive at the moment is like, oh, like I feel so pity that like I do this thing where I try to take on all these problems, like, and now that I've kind of like vocalized that, I kind of do feel like I'm returning back to the like, how will I be okay?
Great.
But let me just check that out for like one more second.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, because like at the root of that, what I just vocalized is also like a how will I be okay? Because like that is like, oh, like I don't trust, like how will I know I will be okay if I like let go of this thing and just trust that?
How do I know if I'm a peony or an iris or a daisy or a poinsettia?
Exactly. And I need to know because I want to not feel so vulnerable. Like I want to be okay. Yeah, I mean, like, there's also like question of like, should I go to LA? Like, how will I be okay in LA? Like, what should I do in this move? But I think those are all,
those are all stemming out of that fundamental question.
I think so. So yeah, I now I can feel like a hunger, like a lot of my parts in my system are all kind of coming together and are like, yeah, like let's find this answer. Like, and not an answer, but like let's we've been trying to ask this question for like 20 years maybe.
All right, let's grab your coins.
All right. What went through me just now is kind of like a very specific iteration of this, like, how am I going to be okay? It's this like part of me that's been imagining myself at the place I'm planning on moving into in Los Angeles that was like, how am I going to be okay here? And I kind of just needed to negotiate with that part and just like, yes, 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 yes. And I don't know. So I don't really know what just happened, but something about just feeling more into at the moment, like the how will I be okay? Okay. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Okay. Something in that kind of just said to me, like, oh, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's kind of laughing with me, like, oh. I don't know if that's relevant or just interesting.
Hexagram 59, melting, enveloped by hexagram 57, intimacy.
Oh.
So let me read to you a little bit. Hexagram 59 is wind over the water. And, water as it melts helps to make wind visible. The lake returning from under the ice. Animacy returns, flow returns, life moves again in the lake. The solve phase of alchemy. Gold is melted to eliminate impurities. Form is boundlessness. Boundlessness is form. It's not so hard to cross the river when you're also fluid. Ice is water. Water is ice. You are not just this state of being. Melt into alignment. Let every frozen spot inside you melt away. Flow into form rather than pouring yourself into a mold. Don't pour anyone else into a mold they're not suited for either. Boundaries dissolve into the neutrality of formlessness. The power to melt is a vast power. All water is one body of water, always returning to itself. Are you trying to hold on to an old form despite the forces of nature, a habit, an addiction, and a relationship? This hexagram suggests not so much cutting ties, but allowing bonds to melt in the light and warmth of day. Release your icy grip and your icy elbows. What would they have? What would they have to pull this out? Would they have to pull this out of your cold, dead hands? Okay, then wait for it. You're in the midst of a vast and inevitable shift. A wide view is being revealed. There may be floods. Your participation is optional. This is happening anyway. Like the ice melting in your lemonade. There's nothing you can do to stop it. The light of truth is revealed. The thing under the thing is revealed. Energy is seeking balance, and you're along for the ride. By allowing your heart to be melted, you join the broader ecology. You discover belonging. Go to the brink of what you can bear and feel your edges dissolve. That was not the edge of you at all. You're bigger now, broader, more spacious, more alive. The only solution is dissolution. You could be melting away. You could be melting toward. This has yet to be determined. A lot rests on your capacity for melting and the contours of the territory. Meet loss. Welcome heartbreak. Stick your hands all the way down into heartbreak like a barrel of beans. Let it feel good to go all the way down until you can't feel where your hand ends and the beans begin. The sense gates are limiters. Open them. Melt in the tsunami of grief and be carried. Taste the tin can tang that spreads down your throat and across your chest when you feel like you're about to lose someone you love. That sensational harbinger of loss. Will your heart expand or explode? Melting is another option. You experience compassion when you surrender control. Let what is best in you flow toward others. Once you melt, you flow. So you have one changing line here, and the changing line is like, changing lines are like the umbilicus between the two hexagrams. And you have a changing line at 3. Melt into the form in front of you. You might want to pour yourself into a mold. Go ahead, try it on. You can always melt again later. Let yourself take a new shape. Choose it consciously. This requires you to let go of the old form first. Keep your attention on what is in front of you, not behind. Pour yourself into service. How does that land so far?
So resonant.
So this melting, like, nothing is lost when ice melts. It's just that the atoms start moving more rapidly. It's a matter of velocity. So the life returning is just a sense of warmth returning to something without really, the form changes, but the substance itself doesn't. It's still water returning to water. And the reckoning with grief that's in that hexagram, like that melting of the heart that's part of that hexagram, and that being okay with whether you're melting toward something or someone or melting away from something or someone is what allows for this hexagram of intimacy. Like, so emerge naturally. This is wind over wind. So we went from wind over water to wind over wind.
Gotcha.
Emerge naturally from the eros of ecology, open to interpenetration. The bee just keeps tumbling in roses. Somehow there are hexagons and honey. Let your character be shaped by eros. Let intimacy amplify the best of you. Emerge from the eros of ecology. Allow yourself to be made by the myriad things. Release your grip. Open your hands. Melt. Let them be held. Touch and be touched. Hug a tree. Press your ear to its bark. Listen to the wind in its leaves and the birds in its branches. Feel the pulse of its roots underfoot, entwined with the mycelium. Interbeing interpenetrates intimately. Everything is rubbing up against each other, even sun and moon, leaves and wind, you and the person in line behind you at the supermarket. Your field is bigger than your skin. Your breath shows this, out beyond you and back again. You are being touched out there already. You are being penetrated there already. Open to the eros of ecology. Don't fight for anything. Fighting implies you are certain. Certainty ruptures intimacy. Don't fight to keep relationships as you think they should be. Resist nothing. Let everyone come and go as they will. If something is yours, open your arms and it will come back to you, but maybe not in the way you want it. Maybe better, maybe not. Let go of your preferences and ideas about how things should be now. Don't block the flow of love that is trying to envelop you. You know that adage about how intimacy means into me, see? Yeah, that. Go with that, fearlessly. Let yourself be seen and heard and touched and felt and loved up. Let people love you. Let people love you. Let people love you. Accept help. Better yet, ask for it. You will receive for what you ask for at this time. Don't be greedy. Be open. Don't grab at anything with a twitchy little hand. Keep your hands open. Keep everything open. Every pore a little suckling mouth at the teat of the way. Let yourself be fed. Let yourself be led. Honor what feeds you by opening your mouth. Unclench your jaw. Give and receive in equal measure. See who's in front of you. Be utterly present, utterly available. Are you not being received in this way? Is someone you love not emotionally available? Is that person you? What are you not saying that needs to be said? What are you not feeling that needs to be felt? People can feel you hiding. They can feel the undertow you are tugging them down with, even if they can't articulate it. Stop doing that. Float with them in the womb of the sea, both of you held, both of you free. Give relationships the chance to breathe and transform in the open field of unconditional love. Someone you love is trying to find out if they can trust you. Do you trust you? Don't turn your back on them, just open your heart to them. If you are sincere, be honest. Let them see you. Let them be seen by you without judgment. See with eyes of love and acceptance. It will change your view and the view of the people that you're looking at. People can feel it when you look at them that way. It will be too much for some of them, this gentle penetration, this being seen. But for the ones who meet that gaze, those are your ride or dies right there. Those are the ones who can trust you and you know you can trust. Mutual penetration is the order of the day. It's not that you deserve love, though you do. It's that you are love. Be that. Don't be afraid, love. Be love. So how will you be okay?
By trusting.
Do the elbows have a place in that context? Does the wind elbow the water?
I don't think so.
What does the wind do to the water?
Gently kisses it, maybe.
There's the energetics of intimacy are revealed in wind and water.
Right, not necessarily gently kissing, like could be, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, it could be. That's one part of it. Yeah, like when you see the wind on a lake and it gives it little peaks.
Gotcha. That does check out. Because what I was first gonna say that was like some beautiful imagery that came to me was like really about like the ice melting kind of thing. I was like, that really checks out for me because I feel like I've been holding myself as this like ice cube. And I'm like, you have to hold on to this ice because like there is like a Bolivian, there is nothingness out there. Like you have to, like, there is some ice, like some beautiful ice that you have, like hold on to it. But with the imagery that you were sharing, I was like, I felt this melting into a greater sea of like being. And I was like, oh, like I feel much more connected and like just part of like
the melting has to come in order for the melting has to happen for the intimacy to come. If not, like the ice stays in one place, right? But when it is restored to the flow of intimacy in the whole body, like how you are in your body is going to be how you are in the body of the world.
Gotcha. And I think that is kind of maybe where, or maybe not that exactly, but I feel like
I think it is.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Thank you. I needed that. Like the elbows, yeah, like it's okay to like elbow, like when I need to. Like there's some like, yeah, like step off. That's like helpful and like a selfish, like a helpful selfishness. Because when I was feeling that ice melting into the larger sea or river imagery, I was like, how can I force myself to do that and be like a beautiful, just like one with the flow? And like, yes, I would love for that to happen, but when I kind of felt into the elbows, I was like, well, like, there's a way to like surrender or melt into this in a way that's like protecting yourself. Cause like maybe there's like, things floating around the river that can hurt me. Like I wanna, or I don't know, like it's maybe like abandon the river thing for the moment. Just like, I don't know.
Well, you asked, how will you be okay?
Okay.
Like, who would you be without the elbows? Do you know?
I think I would maybe be dead. Like, I think if I didn't have elbows, like, pushing things off me, like, maybe I would just be
then
so
things
hurt
could come
by the
towards you.
world.
Then things could come towards you, which is what this is saying with hexagram 57, the intimacy hexagram. So there seems to be something, this seems to be pointing to something is lost with all the elbowing. Like, it's not just when does your protector become a saboteur?
Right. And like often there are situations that really could use elbowing where I do not elbow at all.
Noticing when you need a protector and when your protector has become a saboteur, when your best strategy would actually be that melting and feeling the grief. Like, what are you protecting? What is there to defend, really? Is it your very life? Are you sure? Or is it your identity?
I'm seeing that. I'm seeing like the construct that I have been holding of like, oh, like protecting myself or taking care of myself is antithetical to the rest of the field. But I'm seeing now that like just like completely surrendering to whatever is happening is not actually serving like the whole field. Like there's some amount of like just the selfishness.
How do you know when the ice melts? Does that not serve the river and all beings in the river? The ice is like, no, I'm going to stay ice. Well, how does animacy return to the body of water? How does animacy return to the bigger body?
Oh, I've been viewing this ice melting from like a kind of a forceful way of like, how do we melt so that we join the river? And it's all through this.
Come at it from more of a systems perspective.
In a systems perspective, the ice melts when it's time. It doesn't need to like force it. It's like the temperature increases and then it, melts like, and it's a pretty, harmonious kind of thing. It's not like this ice like plowing into the earth being like melt. There's this like voice in me that's like, please let me be part of the river, like please. But there's this like wisdom in me of like, you will melt when it's right to. And it's not even necessarily so much about the melting. It's like you don't have to force melting. Like in a systems perspective, like it's also helpful to have ice, like sometimes like, so.
Yes. Winter is also necessary.
So like wherever you are, you can be part of the system, maybe?
Well, you already are. So if you're fighting it, you're just squandering your life force. So good luck with that. We are puny humans and we can throw all the elbows we want, which is not to say we don't have agency, but sometimes the better part of agency is noticing what kind of flower we are in the garden and being just that in the time and doing just what that thing does in the time that it's called for.
Yeah, that is cool. And I know like on a deep level, I'm like, yeah, like that's what my life is. But like so much of my day-to-day thing is like, oh, like your current existence is not like a holy one. Like you have to go do something or, change something or adopt this, like, another way of being, or,
Well,
world
you will be
view.
changed, and you will be changed, and what you will have to do will be clear. You don't have to make it up.
Right.
Take that pressure off. And yes, your existence is sacred and not special and not separate. You're not special, but your presence is 100% required.
I think Essie can help me with this, with voices similar to the one that I just expressed. Viewing it as armor is kind of helpful, because when I view that voice as an armor, it's kind of like protecting me of, like, from vulnerability, of like, oh, it's like, it's a little vulnerable to be part of this whole thing. And like, if I can choose, like, what perspective, and if I can choose to be part of divine or whatever, the part of the system or whatever, like,
you don't have a choice about whether to be part of the divine. You already are. The peony doesn't have a choice about when to bud, and frost still might come. And fuck it right up, and it'll have to try again next year. But then it just tries again next year. But when it's time for budding, there's budding. When it's time for leafing, there's leafing. When it's time for blooming, there's blooming.
So I guess there's just a vulnerability around
being alive.
Right. Exactly.
To being a fucking human being.
And that is not something I have felt allowed to, or allowed myself to feel.
Well, that's why I think the grief piece in hexagram 59 is very important. How's your relationship to grief?
It's like a very deep, vast sea. And sometimes I'm in it, I'm like, oh, this is beautiful. Like, But then I can just feel drowned by it. Like,
yeah, are you afraid to be engulfed by it?
Yes, it's way too big for me.
That piece is important here. Yin is not performative. She's a harsh mistress.
Well, I love being performative.
This is why I'm giving you this. We've just met, but this is why I'm giving you this reminder. Like, she is a great engulfer. She is the whale that takes Jonah in and spits him back out differently. But without being engulfed, that myth has no potency.
Gotcha. Because I can feel the engulfment at the moment, and it feels like nurturing. It feels like calm, receivable, good. And then what does not feel good is this very, like, young man kind of yang energy of like, I gotta go do something. And then it tries to lift that whole ocean, and it hurts itself, because it's like, ouch, like, I can't pull this whole ocean.
Exactly. Pulling the whole ocean is never going to be the next emergent action for your essential self.
Oh my God.
You're not going to be given anything that you can't do. Each emergent action is going to be small and build. Like 57 says, the bee just keeps tumbling in roses, and somehow there are hexagons in honey. You don't have to know how to make hexagons and honey. You just got to keep tumbling in roses. Gotcha. And the rest emerges. You're part of you are co-creating the emergent properties of the system by being absolutely you. Free of agenda, free of self-centeredness while being selfish.
Oh, I feel circling back to earlier in the conversation about um, not fighting some of that like masculinity or yang or whatever, because when I've tried to like embrace the yin, I've done it in this way of like, stop being so yang, stop being so masculine. And I was
Then you
just
get pressed into performative yin, which is also
right.
not sincere.
And like does not feel nourishing, does not feel helpful.
Right, exactly. So what can you be with what's actually emerging so that you can have that inner hieros gamos and the energetic mastery that comes with it?
Right. And what kind of came to me as like a next potential like emergent action is just being like not fighting that masculine yang young man whatever. It's kind of just like accepting like yeah like cool like you know like there's use in you like there's cool like I don't have to like be like ugh, but like instead just being like wow like you are a wounded young man like let's like. And as I feel some embracing of that, it feels like a congruence in my system of like oh we can like take care of that young man and also
Yes.
feed the
Yeah.
ocean and like oh
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much
Hmm.
self-compassion in that and so little performance.
And at the moment, I'm feeling in this space of like, I'm kind of like, I'm like with the young man, I'm with the ocean, I'm like with the sand, I'm with the sky. I'm kind of just like, I don't know. I haven't really felt this feeling too much, but I'm kind of just like, oh, okay, like I'm in the, maybe it's Wu Wei or something. It's just like, okay, like I'm in, yeah, like I'm in it. Like I'm,
Look at how your body is moving now versus at the start. It's a different feeling.
Totally.
That's a
What
different
is,
feeling from the elbows. Your hands are doing now. Notice that shift.
mm. Before, the elbows really felt like, oh, like I am a separate self. Like, oh my God, like, oh wow, like a lot of meaning is happening around me, and like I gotta like defend myself, like, this is not gonna be good
Well,
for me.
a
Like,
separate self is always going to have the question, how will I be okay?
gotcha. Because this different thing that has just happened is kind of like, oh, like I don't really know where I am, but like, I don't know. The whole thing is like, I don't know, like swaying or
Well, it's
something.
almost
Like,
like a qigong. It's almost like that qigong exercise.
mm,
You move, you
I
move the
don't know
chi
that
ball.
one.
You move the chi
Oh,
ball.
gotcha.
Yeah, you bring it down to your hara and you move the chi ball.
Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, I'm trying to like feel into and ask what this like different way of being is. And maybe that'll be, ongoing stuff, but there's definitely like different worldview, different and I'm trying to fight the urge to be like, what is that? So I can like know it and and kind of from that separate self kind of controlling like, oh, okay, like
Like let me put it in my identity. Let me pin it to my identity right now.
exactly.
Well, in Zen, there's a saying, not knowing is most intimate. And with your hexagram 57 here of intimacy, I think that's really beautiful. Not knowing is most intimate is, if I could encapsulate your reading between melting and intimacy, and that connecting line of like pour yourself into a mold. You can always melt again later. That it's okay to try new forms without like getting really staunchly solidified or calcified in them, but understand that you can always melt again.
Because that is a tendency in my system to be like, okay, like we did some unraveling and like a lot of stuff came from that and like, oh, cool. And now we need to like form a really solid thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that, of course, because we mistake that for safety.
Right. Oh, and it's maybe safer, or it's not even about, I don't know. I'm just going back to the thing of earlier of like the not knowing is like, that's kind of what's happening. So like, like maybe it's more wise to just be like with, what's actually happening.
Not knowing is most intimate. Not knowing is most intimate. Yeah. Oh, it was such a delight to read for you.
This was unexpected, but like unsurprising, and super grateful for like the turns that it took and like just the different like stuff it covered. Just like very cool. So
Great.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, and good luck with your move.
Thank you.
Take care.
Nice to meet you. You too. Bye.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you so much for joining for the Fuck Suffering with me, Ray Hance podcast today. I hope you enjoyed yourself. If you would like a personal reading like I do for people on the podcast, come to rayhance.com, REIHANCE.com, and go to the Oracle of Emergence page. If you'd like the book I use on this podcast, it's called Oracle of Emergence, an evolutionary I Ching, and that's available on Amazon. If you're interested in a one-on-one session, pocket coaching, one of my Fuck Suffering practice groups, or a one-day boundaries and belonging session, you can also come to the website. You can find me on Instagram, you can find me on the Facebook, and you can find me on my YouTube channel. I'm really all over the place these days. It's my great pleasure to introduce people to the I Ching. And I hope you develop your own relationship with it. And I hope you come back and listen again and subscribe, rate, and review so that this baby podcast can find its way in the world. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.